Professor William Gumede argues that Cadre deployment is one of the main reasons why African countries, including South Africa, fail. This amid calls for younger people and qualified leaders to be put in positions. But given the challenges of Cadre deployment, which were also laid bare in the State Capture Commission, how much of this is a possibility? Professor William Gumede from the Wits School of Governance, Democracy Works Foundation Executive Chair as well, joins us live now. Prof, thank you so much for your time this evening. I mean, yesterday, listening to EFF leader Julius Malema, he says at the press briefing that he doesn't understand why there's still an insistence of what he calls older people that are being put into ministerial positions instead of putting in younger people. And also, I mean, at some point alluding to some, some of them when it comes to the state, in fact, of their health. How much of this, though, when it comes to, these older people, as they call them, being put into positions, how much of this can you put on the doorstep of Cadre deployment?
Thank you for having me. I'm very grateful to be here with you. The ANC is sitting with a problem that is, number one, its leadership is too old. And secondly, the leaders that it has don't have the competence and they don't have the emotional maturity. The only competence they have is political competence, political party competence, because they've been deployed into, political leadership and also into the public sector. And then also they don't have a bigger view of the country and of the world. We're living in a very complex country, in a very complex world, where leaders must have technical capacity. They must also have emotional maturity to deal with our society, which is a trauma-based society. So you have to have people who are mature emotionally. The ANC doesn't have that kind of capable leaders. And then also our society has a typical developing country demographic, in that young people are the majority of voters, whereas the majority of the ANC are older and they're male, and there are also less women, fewer women in the ANC leadership.
So listening to your first point then, are you suggesting that no one is fit to lead in the current ranks of the ANC?
I would suggest, absolutely. The country right now is facing its biggest crisis or series of crises in many generations, certainly since the Second World War. COVID has left out with a financial crisis, and just as we came out of COVID, there's, the Russian-Ukraine war, which has increased food inflation, fuel price increases and so on. And then, of course, we've got state failure and corruption are all combined with absolutely the biggest crisis. Rule of law has totally broken down. We've got the highest unemployment in an emerging market. So what we need is really competent leaders. Now, in any of these crises in a democracy, normally, if you have such high unemployment, normally what happens is a government normally stands down and calls for early elections. So our crisis is so big, and we don't have the competent leadership, and we don't have the energy. So, some of the ANC leaders, they don't have the energy really and the enthusiasm and the will and the ideas to lead. So often, if a country has a crisis, or even, if you're in your personal situation, if you have a crisis, if you have the energy to deal with it, and the ideas to deal with it, and the imagination to deal with it, then you can resolve the crisis. But the kind of leadership that the ANC has now, they are so poor that they don't have the imagination and the ideas and the energy to deal with South Africa's complex problems.
So, Prof, you talk about the crisis, and one of the things that we saw was the Zonde Commission's report, and it talked about the, Cadre deployment, saying that it is unlawful, it is unconstitutional. Then the party says that it is re-looking at some of its own policies, and this policy is one of them. And then fast forward, the president being challenged by the DA, saying that this policy is not necessarily unconstitutional. So juxtaposing it then with all of these developments around this, since they said that they're re-looking at this, and what you're saying about things being at crisis level and not knowing how to resolve a crisis, what do you think is happening internally now to re-look at this particular policy?
You know, the ANC has another problem. So the young people who are in leadership in the ANC, they're almost clones of the old leaders. So they also often many of them don't have the technical skills because, you know, the whole thing about cadre deployment, you get promoted or you get recruited through cadre deployment based on your political loyalty, not based on your skills or your competency or your emotional maturity. So what we have, the ANC then, both the old people and the young people are dominated with, they have political loyalty skills and politically connected, but without a competence. I would suggest going forward, what the ANC needs to do is to look, for example, at a lesson from the Singapore's People Action Party, was also Independence Party. What they did was when they were in a similar crisis and when they renewed, they made a call to the public where they called for open applications from everyone, non-members, members of the ANC suits. You know, the ANC should make a call and then bring in competent people. And then what they should do is forcefully retire most of their leaders, particularly those who are incompetent, those, you know, who've been implicated in wrongdoing, then open up vacancies, make a national call for new, competent, qualified candidate, young people, and of course also more older people, and it must include people who are also not members of the ANC. So they must not only just restrict it to ANC members, and then interview the people, and then, you know, appoint people to ANC leadership in all structures.
So you talk about, you know, ridding itself of those that are implicated in wrongdoing. But, Prof, how much of a reality is this on the ground? How much of it can happen? I mean, we're talking at a time when the Integrity Commission releases its annual report and accuses the party of shielding the leaders that have been implicated in wrongdoing. How much of it can happen? And is the Integrity Commission as toothless as some of the people are accusing it to be?
You know, the sad part, the fact is there's no political will within the ANC to do anything because to deal with this. Although there are many members and leaders in the ANC, of course, you know, they acknowledge there's a crisis, but the ANC is a system which is very difficult to renew. Because there are so members implicated in wrongdoing and so members who are incompetent. So, you know, if there's a cleanup, there's going to be so many members that needs to be fired for either wrongdoing or for incompetence. There may be no ANC left. So there will be resistance, of course, against any renewal. Now, normally, you know, when I refer to Singapore, what happened, you know, when they did their renewal, they really did it brutally. You know, they had a political will, they did it brutally. There was a rebellion in their party in Singapore when they did it, but they forced it through. So if, for example, President Ramaphosa does it, there's going to be a rebellion, then he has to be determined, and face a rebellion. And even if it means splitting the ANC, they should accept that. So the ANC leadership, and particularly President Ramaphosa, is so afraid of splitting the ANC. So, you know, so he doesn't have the enthusiasm to deal really with leaders who are incompetent, who don't have the energy, or who are implicated in wrongdoing because he wants to hold the ANC together.
How much of it, though, Prof, is it about holding the ANC together, or also has something to do with the allegations that have been leveled against him as well?
You know, even before the allegations was leveled, you know, his Farmgate allegations was leveled against him, remember, you know, he also then did not act against, you know, ANC leaders implicated in wrongdoing or found to be incompetent. Now that he's implicated in allegations of wrongdoing against himself, I think he will even have less enthusiasm to deal with others. You know, who have been implicated in wrongdoing or who have been incompetent, because what he now, certainly his strategy most likely is going to be to be re-elected at the ANC's December conference, he will have to strike alliances with many of the incompetent leaders and many of the leaders implicated in wrongdoing. And because he's also now implicated in wrongdoing, I think he will now most probably strike an alliance with all of those wrongdoers in order to get re-elected again. So we will now we may see less enthusiasm from the president to deal with incompetent and leaders implicated in wrongdoing.
Prof, it's going to be an interesting road to December then, listening to your final answer. But let me thank you for your time this evening. Do appreciate it. Thank you so much for joining us. That is Professor William Gumede from the Wits School of Governance, and he's also with Democracy Works Foundation.